Hi, I'm Dr. Sherwana Davis, a psychotherapist, and today I want to talk with you about addiction recovery. There's lots of information about addiction, but there's not a focus on addiction recovery. So I want to make it really simple just for people who are looking to support someone who may be having an addiction issue, or if you are someone who is struggling with addiction. So, just a quick disclaimer that the information that I am presenting is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as legal, medical, or psychological advice. Although I strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for professional advice. And you should not rely solely on this information. So, please consult with a licensed professional before making a psychiatric, psychological, professional, legal, instructional, and financial or tax related decisions. So, what is addiction, right? We hear that word and phrase touted about a lot, but what is it? Well, addiction is a chronic condition characterized by compulsive use of drugs or behaviors despite harmful consequences. And its effects on the brain, it really centers on that reward system and decision making processes. And it can lead to a cycle of craving, use, guilt, and withdrawal. And I'll show you that. So there are different types of addiction. I know there's a lot of attention drawn to substance abuse, but you may not have known that there's also behavioral addiction and process addictions. So, substance use, of course, is drugs and alcohol related. Behavioral addiction is a little different. That is more gambling and gaming. So, there are lots of people that are addicted to gaming. And so that would go into that behavioral addiction category. And then there's process addiction. And that category is really about food and things that are process related. So you think about food and sex addiction, those are in that bundle. Just some interesting stats. Approximately 35 million people worldwide suffer from drug use disorders. And if you think about it, a lot of people don't necessarily report their addiction issues. So these numbers may be lower than what's really out there. And the same for alcohol use. Because alcohol use is so socially acceptable in society, it may go underreported and people may have an issue or a problem and not even recognize it because it's so socially acceptable to use alcohol. Here are some symptoms to look out for as it relates to addiction. So typically there's changes in behaviors, there are mood swings, there could be social withdrawal because what happens with addiction, all of the basic needs become secondary to whatever that addiction is. The primary need is to fulfill whatever that addiction need is. So people may neglect their responsibilities. We know that people run into financial difficulties because the focus is on getting whatever that addiction object is and physical health problems. So even if it's something like gaming, right, where someone is so fixated on it, they may never leave a couch or a bed because they're playing that game, and so they may neglect their food or other ways of remaining healthy, and just overall just physical health problems that they may encounter. Here's what the cycle of addiction looks like. So typically, there is a craving that someone may have, and then that craving leads this person to use, right? There's this compulsion to fulfill what that craving is. And then typically there is guilt associated with that. And then if somebody is trying not to use, they may temporarily be able to abstain and may experience some withdrawal symptoms. And then it starts all over again, where it's the craving, the use, the guilt, withdrawal, craving, use, guilt, withdrawal, right? And so this is the typical cycle that people encounter. There are different stages of recovery. So, when we think about someone who is seeking recovery, the first stage is just acknowledging that there's even an issue. And that's a big step, particularly for substances that are socially acceptable, right? Such as cannabis use or alcohol. People may not necessarily know they even have a problem because it's so socially acceptable. So, just that acknowledgement is a step in the recovery process. Then there is detoxification, or that's when people are trying to no longer use and they're cleaning out their system, or they're trying to no longer give into that compulsion to engage in that activity or the target of their addiction. Then there's typically some sort of rehabilitation where someone may go either formally or informally through some sort of recovery program. So it can be a 12-step group, or it can be a peer group that people are involved in, or an inpatient facility that people may seek out as well. And then maintenance. This is the stage where it can also become very difficult for people, right? So if you think about in the very beginning, there's that honeymoon stage where someone is not using, they're excited about it, they're getting cheered on, but to maintain that sobriety is really, in some cases, the most difficult part of addiction recovery. There are various levels of care. So, if you are someone or you are supporting someone, it's really important that you understand the levels of care, right? So, the highest level of care is something like a level 4, and that is inpatient, where you're really seeking to remove that person from the environment, right? And the number one job for inpatient is really to save that person's life. There's some heightened level of risk involved. And a lot of times, if it's a substance, the goal there is to completely clean their system out from from that particular substance. And the way to do it is that inpatient. It's really designed to save that person's life. So that's probably the most critical level of care is that level 4. Then level 3 is more residential, where, particularly if it's a substance, that person is no longer around or having that substance in their system. And so the goal there is to teach them some recovery skills, right? And to remove them from their environment for that to happen. And so that residential facility is there to support the person so that they are really protected, and given a little bit of leeway to build those recovery skills before they re enter the environment. So that's that residential setting, and that's really helpful for that person to be away from the target of their addiction. The next level is intensive outpatient, and so that's the step down. People choose intensive outpatient for various reasons, right? It's a step down before they completely feel like they are confident in their recovery skills. It's also useful for people who cannot go to a residential facility. Ideally, if somebody is really at risk of relapse from their environment, that residential facility provides them with a layer of protection so they get those skills. But for various reasons, that may not necessarily work for people. Sometimes people have jobs and family responsibilities, and they just economically sometimes can't go to a residential program. And so they'll seek out intensive outpatient options to try to manage their recovery. And so that's an option that people will do. And it's long term in terms of the number of days and hours a week that people spend, but they are not at the facility. They still are in their environment. They still get to go home. And then level 1 is really, when we think about that maintenance period, that's usually the step when people are at that point where they're just trying to maintain and they're in the early stages of maintenance. That level 1 is really beneficial because there's still that level of accountability, that's there's a reinforcement there to support that person as they are in that maintenance phase. So, and really trying to sustain that maintenance phase of their recovery. Even with all of those things in place, there's still some challenges that people may experience, and it's really important to overcome those. And these are just some of the techniques and tools that that people can use to overcome and really maintain their sobriety. So, mindfulness techniques, a lot of times people are triggered when they are at the brink of relapse. And so, that mindfulness techniques allows people to know that just because I have a thought, I don't have to entertain that thought. I can let it go, right? I can not let that thought dictate behavior. So, mindfulness is very, very good with that. Stress management, stress is a huge trigger for people, right? And it's a relapse excuse in some cases where people are stressed out and they're just looking for a way to escape. And so, having good stress management tools and techniques is essential. Relapse prevention skills, again, if you've been in a structured environment, you get those relapse prevention skills, and those are really good to let you know that relapse doesn't start from the moment that someone starts using that addictive substance or is around whatever it is that's the object of their addiction. It usually starts way before then. It starts with a thought, and then that moment of relapse, that moment, if we're even talking about substance use, the moment that the person starts using that substance, that's usually the last stage of that relapse. Support from peers and support groups, right? It's really important if you are with people who are in recovery, people who can show you and talk to you and talk with you is really important. And it can be very isolating because a lot of times when people are in recovery, they're learning new skills. So, having support from peers and support groups is essential. And then, of course, addiction recovery professionals, therapists, and counselors can really help people maintain their sobriety because they can really get to the heart of what caused the initial reason that this person um, has this addiction that they're now experiencing. It could be trauma, it could be a lot of things that happen to the person. And so they're able to get to the heart of that to help them sustain their recovery. And then make sure that you have good support systems. Sometimes when you're in recovery, it may mean changing some people out, right? So it may involve really evaluating who your support system is, who's your family, who's your friends, who are your peers, who are the professionals that are really there and will help support your overall health. Because it really, addiction recovery is really about your overall health and well being. So you want real people that are really going to be supportive of you and are not going to sabotage the recovery process. If you need help, these are just some helplines, right? So, from a recovery standpoint, SAMHSA, that national helpline is available and they are there and can help link you to some resources to get treatment and understand about addiction. They have a wealth of material as well. So, that's a good line as well. And then here's the crisis lifeline. So, if you or someone you know is in crisis, that is a national number that you can call to get support. I hope this was helpful and thank you for watching.